There are three main level 0 pony archetypes, and all of them have seen some presence in Modern, but it has been difficult for them to break through. One being the wall deck. Oh, you have so many creatures, they will never get through my defense, and as proud as the wall players are, they have not been able to have any significant presence in the Modern metagame. The life gain decks. You know, deal as much damage as you want. You will not be able to defeat me because I have gained so much life. These archetypes have had some presence, but nothing in the Tier 1 territory. But finally, there is one more Super Pony deck, which has so devious, so cunning, and so mischievous, is finally broken through thanks to the upgrades from Zendikar Rising. I bring you, finally, a competitive Modern Mill deck. Hey everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and today we're going to look at an archetype that's always been on the fringe, it's always been on the edge of actually pushing through in Modern, and I think we finally have that right now. Modern Mill is finally a real deck in Modern. Let's take a look at it. And before I even address the entire deck, I want to just re-emphasize that a lot of these decks on the edge of being competitive are always something like 4 to 8 cards away from actually becoming a real deck. And, you know, maybe those 4 cards exist already in Modern and have to be discovered, or sometimes we have to wait for them to get printed. And I think that's exactly what happened here with the Modern Mill deck. And the new upgrades that have taken this deck to the next level are Ruin Crab and also maybe Blood Chief's Thirst. These are 2 new additions to the archetype, which helped this particular deck, piloted by the Enzyme, to win the Modern Challenge, alright? Not top 8, not make top 60, not go deep. Win the Modern Challenge. Win the whole tournament. Not only that, this was not the only mill deck that had presence there. This was one of 3 mill decks that made the top 32 in the Modern Challenge. Let's take a look at it. So, mill is like a burn deck, except you're trying to mill the person's cards out of their library and not take damage out of their face. And the problem with that is there have not been enough reliable mill cards available to the mill players in order to, you know, facilitate that. But now, not only do we have Hedron Crab, which 1 blue and a 0/2 creature, landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into their graveyard. And of course, with the fetch lands, you play the fetch land, mill them for 3, and then you crack the fetch land, mill them for another 3. Fantastic card, but not consistent enough because they didn't have enough crabs. Now enter Ruin Crab, landfall whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. Each opponent mills 3 cards. So similar effect, but this one's actually upgraded to a 0/3 creature, which you might not think is that big of a deal. So what? You can still kill it with Lightning Bolt. Do you know what? That is actually quite the upgrade in the Modern metagame, given a metagame with Lava Dart, which can only deal a total of 2 damage. Some decks are playing Firebolt. We see a lot of Seal of Fire in the metagame, not to mention a lot of 2-power creatures. If this thing can do a little bit on defense while still doing the same thing that the Hedron Crab was already doing. So now they're more consistently getting the milling going with the fetch lands and can execute their game plan. This deck's also playing with Ashiok Dreamrender. Fantastic addition to the archetype. Not only a recurring source of milling every single turn, but also shutting down a lot of archetypes. You can't search your library anymore, Titan decks. You can't get your game plan going on Dredge decks. Whatever you have in the graveyard, we're going to exile all of that stuff. So Ashiok Dreamrender, fantastic addition to this deck, while still actually being a great main deck hoser against a lot of archetypes. Blood Chief's Thirst. So not only do we have Fatal Push, but we also have something to deal with the early portion of the game, which Mill always had to do. Mill had to play a little bit of a control game, make sure that they didn't get blown out of the water, and you see in the world of Mono Red Prowess, and also, not only that, like even Death Shadow, this thing can kill a lot of relevant creatures within the Modern metagame, or slow the opponent down so that the milling strategy can fulfill itself. You know, Burn has things like Searing Blaze, dealing damage to you and also dealing with creatures, but also all those damage spells in general interact with creatures in some way or another, and also Mill has to take a very similar approach by killing creatures. Cling to Dust, so, you know, still interacting with Uro decks or any decks that have any particular important cards in their graveyard. Surgical Extraction, and that's the beauty of the mill deck. If you love the idea of completely shutting your opponent's strategy down by milling their good cards into the graveyard, because we all know how painful that could be. Oh, they just put my Planeswalker in the graveyard. That's what the mill players live for. They live for that emotional reaction of putting the good stuff into the graveyard and for it to be gonzo. Surgical Extraction takes that to a completely different level. Now that your Primeval Titan is in the graveyard and the Surgical Extraction, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? You going to try that Dryad of the Elysian Grove Valakut strategy idea? Oh yeah, well I'll Surgical that too! Yes, that's right. Now you got nothing. Get in the red zone with your Secura Tribe or whatever. You go, yeah, bring it on, Azusa. Let's see you get into the red zone. And same thing with like Ad Nauseam. Okay, Surgical Extract your Ad Nauseam. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do about it? You gonna cry? You gonna cry, Ad Nauseam player? Surgical Extraction also can deal with some some people are like, well, to beat Mill, it's just easy. Just put an Emrakul in your deck or something. Well, you know what? If you put that in the graveyard, they can Surgical that away too, and then, I mean, like, not only did you put a garbage card in your deck, but they have the answers to it anyway. Visions of Beyond, card advantage. So if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you can draw 3 cards, literally Ancestral Vision in this sort of deck. Glimpse the Unthinkable. This is like the Boros Charm of the archetype. Mill 10 cards into their graveyard. An Archive Trap, of course. If an opponent searches their library this turn, you can pay 0 rather than pay Archive Trap's mana cost. Target opponent puts the top 13 cards of their library into their graveyard. Massive chunk of their deck that's going to the graveyard. You might say, well, do you know what? They don't have to look into their deck if they don't want to. Oh yeah? You think that? You really believe so? Field of Ruin. Field of Ruin would disagree. Pay 2, sacrifice Field of Ruin, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. Each player, that includes you, searches their library for a basic land card, puts it on the battlefield, and shuffles their library. Now, you don't have to put a land onto the battlefield, but you will be forced to pick it up and look at it, and then shuffle it. That's exactly what Field of Ruin does. So they can force this interaction with Archive Trap and make you dump 13 cards. And you know what, personally, hot tip, I wouldn't look for that land because you might need it so you don't completely mill yourself out. Archive Trap still can be forced on you because of Field of Ruin. Mesmeric Orb has been a staple of the mill decks for a very long time. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. So if you're a type of deck that has to cast very large things, use up a lot of mana, every single land that you tap every single turn, or all the cards that you have to use to tap to attack, you gotta untap them, and that mills you by a ton. Fraying Sanity. Enchant player. At the beginning of each end step, enchanted player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into that graveyard from anywhere this turn. So, I mean, if they Fraying Sanity you, and then follow it up with Archive Trap, goodbye 26 cards. Nice knowing you. Absolutely nice knowing you. So they're basically more or less a blue-black mana base. But you know what? There might be a situation where you're like, you know what? I don't want to draw cards. But then you know what? They'll be like, no. Yeah, you do want cards. You're gonna take it. Each player draws a card with Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. 2 mana, tap. Each player draws a card. They'll slowly mill you out. Just sweet icing on the top, while still also being card advantage for the mill deck. Oh my God, Oboro's in this deck? So extra land, you're guaranteed landfall triggers with Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab over and over again. You might just get Oboro'd to death. And, you know, it's interesting to think about this deck. What is it going to do against Dredge? I mean, so many decks use their graveyard. What on earth? What answers do they have to beat those Uros decks? What are they going to do against Dredge? Do you know what? They have something called Ravenous Trap, which they have the option to. If an opponent had 3 or more cards put in their graveyard from anywhere this turn, you can pay 0 rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. They've got the answer to the graveyard-centric decks with Ravenous Trap. And by the way, they also have the Asterisk Dream Render, of course. They've got it all. So if you love ruining people's day while still doing something incredibly unique. By the way, this is not just the first mill deck that is competitive in Modern. I think this is the first mill deck competitive, period. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, mill is a thing in draft, but not in constructed. You don't see legacy mill decks running around here and there. I mean, I think this is genuinely a very unique thing, and will have a unique place in the modern metagame now that it has all the cards that it needs to actually execute its strategy. We have so many of these combo decks that are fragile to getting their cards milled over. And the same thing, I mean, you may not even need to use surgical extraction to beat like Valakut decks. You might just mill the Valakuts into the graveyard, and that's it. It's over. GG. What the hell is your strategy? Imagine being up against a Scape Shift deck where they need to get up to their 7 to 8 lands to combo off against you, but they know they're working up to nothing because the Valakuts are in the graveyard. Or maybe then too many mountains hit the graveyard or something like that. So I think right now this has actually a pretty interesting position in the modern metagame, and this is just the beginning. We're going to see more of this to come. And you can play this deck today with a Premier subscription from Mana Traders, the premier place to rent Magic cards online. And you can support the channel by using my Mana Traders link in the description below, or you can get 20% off your first 3 months using my coupon code Nikachu. So you can find a link to this deck in the description below, and this just proves again that there is a deck for everyone in Modern, including the mill players.